All right, happy Friday. Just to make sure that I didn't miss any of you coming in. I still don't see Hope yet. No Angel Cardenas yet. Is that right? No Dario yet. No Michael yet. And no Gianna yet, right? Is that correct? Everyone else is here? All right, let's make sure we got this right. Okay, so no Hope. No Angel. Dario. Michael. No Gianna. Two, three, four, five. All righty, happy Friday to you. Good to be at the end of the week. We will finish this unit on the Battle of France today, which is module 13. So quickly, I'll review with you what we discussed yesterday in terms of the start of World War II, the Blitzkrieg and the Lightning War into Poland, where the Germans take over Poland in 5 weeks. And then we had the Battle of France. That's over in 6 weeks. The battle to take over Poland was September 1st, 1939, over in 5 weeks, very early in October of 39. And then by 1940 in May, Hitler has regrouped and basically made advances on the country of France, which is to Germany's west. Remember, Poland is to Germany's east. And within 6 weeks, due to miscalculations, the Germans are going to control all of France, essentially. They're going to occupy the north. They're going to put a puppet government in charge in the south. And it's going to be 4 years that the Germans hold that country, basically, in terms of what they have. So if you're in Canvas, go ahead and get to module 13. Michael. All right, so yesterday, and let me get to our map here. All right, so this is what Europe looks like before the start of World War II. And what we have happen, as we've said before here, September 1st of 1939, the Germans basically are going to move to the east and attack Poland. Now, earlier, remember that Stalin and Hitler had signed an agreement that basically gave spheres of influence. Poland was going to be controlled by the Germans, and then this area up here of your Baltic states, Lithuania, Belarus, those small Baltic states were going to be controlled by the Soviet Union. And so once Hitler didn't have to worry about the Soviet Union, right, in terms of attacking from the east to the west towards Germany, he had decided to take over Poland because much of the land that Poland holds came from World War I. Remember, this area here of Czechoslovakia is the Rhineland. He had taken over the rest of Czechoslovakia, just as Winston Churchill had predicted. even after the Munich Agreement, when he agreed not to do anything. The first area that he took over was Austria, and then an area of concern, and let me change the color on that, an area of concern for the French and the Germans was this area known as Alsace-Lorraine, that makes up the western border of Germany and France, or the eastern border of Germany and France. And basically, this was the area, remember, where the Germans were not allowed to have any military armaments or troops in that area. Once they started building up that area, then what you have, right, is the creation of the Maginot Line, right? That bunkered system that France set up with the border of Germany to protect or buy themselves enough time to stop an invasion. So the Germans, right, using what they have learned, basically, right, force quickly and try to break through the line. They also had gone into the Netherlands, down through Belgium, and then it's a straight shot to Paris. Now, the goal of the Germans in that Blitzkrieg was to basically break through, and then what you can do is you flank them and you can attack them from the front and the back. And eventually what happens is, and that's what that movie Dunkirk was about 4 years ago, is the British had come across the channel to help the French fight the Germans because they declared war on Germany after Germany attacks Poland in September of '39. Is they basically have to evacuate across the English Channel. And that's why it takes 4 years, and the D-Day, the landing at Omaha Beach and 5 other beaches along that coast to get back onto the European mainland for the Allies. So that's sort of where we left off. I want to give you sort of an overview of what happens. Then we'll talk about sort of the evacuation at Dunkirk. We'll do a review game and make sure that you're ready. We'll also review these map identifications for you. There's only 12 for this Battle of France. And let me set that up for you. So I noticed that a couple of people yesterday were putting capitals as the country name. So remember to use this map here and get the country name, right? So when you're looking at this, it's not the country of Berlin, that's the capital, it's Germany. So make sure that you use the country name when you're putting these on. But on this map here, there's 4 identifications. 1 is Germany, 2 is Austria, 3 is Czechoslovakia, 4 is Poland, all right? On the second 4 that you need to know, here we go here. These are 1, Denmark, 2 is Norway, 3 is Sweden, and 4 is Finland. And then the last 4 that you need to know, get down to that here, right? When you look at this, 1 is France, 2 is Belgium, 3 is the Netherlands, and 4 is the country, small country of Luxembourg. And so remember that those are on your map, but use the country names when you put in your responses and you'll be set there. The second thing that we had you do were the review questions over the Battle of France. And that sort of picks up with the last 2 modules that we did. Those units come together in terms of appeasement. So they talk a little bit about the Munich Agreement. Let me open that up as well. It's up here. Okay, so sharing this with you. On these review questions here, the treaty that ends World War I and sort of leads to the right of Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany is the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler becomes the essential dictator of Germany in the 1930s. Remember that he is going to be Chancellor of Germany by 33. 3, what is the last major attempt at a peaceful resolution with Germany prior to the outbreak That is Chamberlain and his idea of appeasement with the Germans and the Munich Agreement. What event began World War II? That is the invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939. And then 5, it asks, this was a line of fortifications across the French border with Germany. That is the Maginot Line. It's just a series of bunkers. But basically, it's that little sort of arrow type position on the French and German border. And then 6, the British Expeditionary Force had to evacuate France in 1940 through the French port of Dunkirk, and that was a movie. So I'll show you sort of what the recreation of that looks like for most people. So let's look at this first. So this here is a look at the Battle of France at a very crucial time in May of 1940. And then what I'll do is I'll show you the trailer from the movie Dunkirk so you can see what the evacuation was like at the end, basically in June, the surrender there. We'll show you what Hitler does when he enters Paris and makes the French sign a surrender agreement. And then we will look at the review game and get you ready for that unit test. So let me make sure we're set here.
At the same place. Yeah, the same place as, okay. May 18th, 1940. Every episode of this series begins with a hook, right? Something new in the war, something different, or something exciting. This week, it's one word: breakthrough. I'm Indy Nidell. This is a double-length special episode of World War II. Yep, although any week of the war can in some way be seen as pivotal, this is a major one, and I cannot cram it all into a regular episode. Last week, the Germans were advancing in Norway, but a debate over Narvik in British Parliament sparked events that led to Winston Churchill replacing Neville Chamberlain as Prime Minister. Britain invaded and occupied Iceland, and Germany invaded France and the Benelux countries. I'm going to talk about that second invasion this week. In fact, that is all I'm going to talk about this week. There are also notable events occurring in China and Norway, but I will get back to them next week. Don't worry. Julian Jackson begins chapter 1 of his The Fall of France with an anecdote from May 16, 1940, a full week after the German invasion has begun. Winston Churchill was woken by a phone call from Paul Reynaud, French Prime Minister. He spoke in English and evidently under stress. "We have been defeated." As I did not immediately respond, he said again, "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." I said, "Surely it can't have happened so soon." But he replied, "The front is broken near Sedan. They are pouring through in great numbers with tanks and armored cars." The night before, Reynaud wires Churchill that the situation is grave. And Churchill points out that there had been times in World War I when things had seemed grim, but Reynaud says this is worse. Later on the 16th, French Defense Minister Edouard Daladier tells Army Commander Maurice Gamelin that they absolutely must counterattack. And Gamelin asks, with what? He has no reserves left to deploy. Daladier says that this means the destruction of the French armies. Nothing stands between the Germans and Paris. When you read accounts of the German invasion this week, they mostly concentrate on that German breakthrough at Sedan on the Meuse River. But in both Belgium and the Netherlands, where the Allies expected the invasion to happen, things also do not go as planned. In the Netherlands, German airborne units take the Moerdijk Causeway and cut the country in two. And the Dutch army withdraws north towards Rotterdam and Amsterdam. The French 7th Army, which has advanced to Breda to try to link with the Dutch forces, now finds that task impossible. Its commander, Henri Giraud, is ordered to fall back from Breda and redeploy further south near Antwerp. The Dutch only hold out for a few more days until after the bombing of Rotterdam. See, the evening of the 13th, advance units of the German 39th Army Corps reach the city. They are under General Rudolf Schmidt. who has orders to avoid unnecessary Dutch civilian casualties. But every hour the city holds out can sabotage the German timetable, and his men are needed for the push through Belgium into France. So the plan to crush Rotterdam's resistance is a tank attack at 3:30 the next afternoon, preceded by an air raid on the surroundings at 3 o'clock. At noon, local Dutch commander Colonel Pavot gets an ultimatum to surrender or the Luftwaffe will hit the city center. Pavot says he has to consult The Hague. The Hague sends a deputation to Rotterdam to talk terms with the Germans, arriving at 2 o'clock. At 1:30, Schmidt sends a signal to call off the air raid, but he is 5 minutes too late. By the time the 100 Henkel 3s in the air are sent the abort order, they are in Dutch airspace, which means the radio operators have closed their positions to take combat stations. German ground forces send up red abort flares, but in the haze and smoke shrouding the city, they are not seen until 57 of the bombers have dropped 100 tons of bombs on Rotterdam, destroying the city center and killing or wounding thousands of Dutch civilians. The Dutch garrison surrenders at 5 o'clock. The Dutch have beaten the Germans at the Battle of Afsluitdijk this same day, but though Zeeland holds out until the 18th, the war is over for the Dutch army, and a Dutch government in exile is established this week in London. In retaliation for the bombing of Rotterdam comes the first large-scale strategic bombing of the war, as the Allies target Geisenkirchen, Hamburg, Bremen, Cologne, Essen, Duisburg, Düsseldorf, and Hanover over the next few days. It is not leaflets they are dropping this time. As for Giraud's French units retreating from Breda, many are badly mauled and some even surrounded. The remaining French forces concentrate on Walcheren, where the French Navy launches a large-scale evacuation. And by midnight on the 17th, French resistance on Walcheren is finished, and the battle for the Netherlands is over. In Belgium, the brilliant German capture of Fortress Eben Emael last week compromised the Belgian defenses, so they decided to pull back from the Albert Canal to the Doubs River. This, though, compromises the French plans, which require the Belgians to hold off the Germans long enough for the French First Army to take position. General Puy, whose cavalry is the advance of that army, arrives in position the 11th to find the Belgians have done little fortification. He asks permission to fall back to the Schelde River, but is refused. The main bulk of the First Army will arrive the 14th, so Puy is to delay the Germans until then. This he does. His two light mechanized divisions hold off two panzer divisions in the Battle of Hanau. This is the largest tank-on-tank battle in history at this point, with each side fielding over 600 tanks. The French lose 105 tanks, and the Germans 165. So much for the idea that the French are incapable of fighting panzer divisions head-on. The First Army then holds the line on the Doubs the 15th, but because of the breakthrough further south on the Meuse, tactical victory here could turn into an overall strategic disaster. The First Army is ordered to withdraw to the French border the 16th. Elsewhere in Belgium this week, the Germans take Liège the 13th and enter Brussels and Antwerp the 17th. The British and French have fallen back to the river Dendre, and the Belgian government has moved to Ostend. The main thrust of the German attack, though, is not through the Benelux countries, nor is it against the Franco-German border. It is through the Ardennes and spearheaded by panzer divisions under overall command of Ewald von Kleist. 3 divisions under Heinz Guderian that made for Sedan, 2 under Georg Hans Reinhardt that went to Monthermé, and another 2 further north under Hermann Hoth that went to Dinant. 134,000 soldiers and 1,600 vehicles in all, of them over 1,200 tanks. The first German units reached the Meuse at 2 o'clock in the afternoon of May 12th, and most of them have not seen a single enemy soldier to that point. And though the French are aware that there are German forces in the Ardennes, they are not aware that this is the main attack, and they certainly do not think the Germans will try an immediate crossing of the mighty Meuse. Had they thought that, the endless lines of German tanks moving along the winding roads of the Ardennes would be easy targets for Allied bombers, as would the roads themselves. and tanks cannot go through the actual forest. The British bombers have been busy working in Belgium, though, and taking heavy casualties. By the 12th, only 72 of the 135 bombers they had had 2 days earlier are still in service. That day, General Alphonse Georges, commander of the French field armies, who's been getting recon from the Ardennes, orders bomber priority switched from the 1st Army in Belgium to the 2nd at the Meuse. General Gaston Billot, commanding the 1st Army, is astonished by this and changes the order to just 1/3 to go to the 2nd Army. Now, its commander, General Charles Hunziker, has not requested any extra bomber support in his sector and even now refuses the support. Georges has also decided, though, to send 6 divisions of reserves to back up Hunziker. But the direction they're sent assumes the Germans will pivot and try to attack the eastern border Maginot Line defenses from behind. So these reserves won't be in a position to respond to the German breakthrough when it happens. One of Maurice Gamelin's aides speculates that the French might be entering a trap because the Germans have barely bombed the columns of men entering Belgium. He is ignored. Sedan is not that large a place here in 1940. It's around 12,000 people. Hunziker thinks it's the least vulnerable part of his command, so he has his best forces away on his right flank. Covering Sedan itself is just the B reserve troops that I talked about before, and just 1 anti-aircraft battery. Contrary to popular belief, though, and contrary to what Hunziker tells Reynaud and Reynaud tells the French nation, they do blow the bridges over the Meuse. All of them. And the French artillery is pretty good at slowing the Germans across the river, who are, as I said, easy targets. Until 7 a.m. the 13th, when the Luftwaffe arrives. Group Kleist has around 1,000 planes, so 1 AA battery isn't going to do much good there. Thing is, the 8-hour Stuka dive bombing that day does not do much actual damage to the French bunkers, but it drives off a large part of the B reserves, who are certainly not trained to fight that and cannot be expected to. There is no Allied aerial response. A word here about the Maginot Line. It is generally believed that it is a fortified line along France's eastern border, and around Sedan and further west are just temporary structures. This is not the case. I know because I was there last month and saw it for myself. In and around Sedan and Donchery are casemates and bunkers, well-built and mutually supporting artillery, machine gun, and observation posts in an interconnected defense system. There are ouvrage here and indeed all the way to the Channel. Hunziker, also responsible for implementing construction here, is actually way behind with it, but there is still plenty of defense here. It is also generally believed that the purpose of the Maginot Line is to be an unbreakable defense line. This is also not the case. It is to be supported by infantry, and between those troops and the defensive works, it is to hold back the Germans long enough for full mobilization and deployment. So what do you think happens once the Luftwaffe has driven off the B reserves? If you say breakthrough, then you, my friend, are mistaken. The Germans managed to destroy a few bunkers, and by 11 at night have built a bridge that can support tanks, but the French are holding out pretty well in spite of the Luftwaffe. In fact, they will hold off the 2nd Panzer Division so well that it needs to be basically rescued by the 1st. By the 14th, the Germans have made crossings at 3 points, Sedan, Hoo, and Monterrey. Hoo is actually the 1st, and it is Erwin Rommel's men who made the crossing. His attack of 13th is helped in part by his brilliant tactics, and in part because André Korat's 9th Army is not even close to being in position. 2 divisions having marched 85 kilometers in 3 straight night marches to even be there. They're not motorized. Where the positioned French regulars fight, though, at Monterrey, the Germans are not yet able to bring tanks across the river. And the bridgeheads themselves are not a catastrophe anyhow. An effective counterattack could push them back, but it does not come. Again, the failure is in the French command. They don't counterattack the evening of the 13th, even though infantry and armor are there for such an attack by 7 p.m. The order does not come until the morning, and command is reluctant to send forces in too quickly. And all this time, the Germans are moving tanks across the river. When the counterattack finally comes, it is mauled by panzers. And where are the Allies in the air while the Luftwaffe strikes? On the 13th, British Air Chief Marshal Arthur Barrett rests his men for a full day after their action in Belgium and Holland. When the Allied planes finally attack on the Meuse early the 14th, in small groups of 10 or 20 for God knows what reason, both British and French alike suffer heavy losses and are unable to destroy the German bridgeheads. Now, conventional wisdom says that the Germans will next take the ridge south of Sedan, control of which will open the way to central France. Heinz Guderian does not do this. He pivots west with the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions along the main road that follows the Meuse, leaving the 10th to consolidate. When people talk about the German advance, it's in terms of 60 kilometers per day. On the 14th, they make around 6. The French defense structures, even without infantry support, are doing their job just fine, delaying the Germans. And if they only make 6 kilometers per day, the Allies can soon be there in force. Hunsinger orders his men to evacuate that night. All that cannot be carried in silence is to be left behind, so they leave their heavy guns and ammunition. As for Korap's army, with Rommel at one end and Guderian at the other, it has begun to disintegrate, and he has been granted his request to pull back from the line of the Meuse to a line from Charleroi to Rethel, a line with no natural defenses. Korap loses his job for his efforts and will be replaced by Giraud. What will Giraud command? It is May the 15th that the Germans begin moving with speed after assaulting the now vacant fortifications along the Meuse. Nothing at all lay in Reinhardt's path, and he has covered some 60 kilometers by late afternoon the 15th. But what about the French armored reserves under General Flavigny, including the 3rd Armored under General Brocard? They are mobile. They have been sent toward the left flank of the 2nd Army, but have been hastily assembled and need to refuel. If they attack the 14th, they certainly have a more than decent chance of stopping Guderian before he breaks out of the bridgehead. They don't. As for the 15th, the French tanks performed well. Unfortunately, this battle had become irrelevant since Guderian was already pushing northwest into France. The caution and hesitation of Flavigny and Brocard and the impetuosity and boldness of Guderian perfectly encapsulated the difference between the French and the Germans in 1940. I cannot emphasize this enough. The breakthrough at Sedan, May 1940, is mainly a command failure, not a failure of men, material, and defense works. On the 16th, Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps, spearheaded by Rommel's 7th Division, are east of Cambrai. Guderian is moving on Saint-Quentin. A halt order is issued to them, though, because more conservative higher-ups, like Kleist, cannot believe panzers can advance so far without exposing their flanks. But it is actually the speed itself that has protected them and thrown the French into disarray. Guderian will exploit a loophole in his orders. He is allowed to do reconnaissance in force. This is what he now says he's doing. On the 17th, he reaches the Oise south of Guise. On his left, Charles de Gaulle and the French 4th Armored Division attack northward from near Léon, but the Luftwaffe shuts them down and prevents any serious gains. Lord Gort and the British Expeditionary Force in Belgium are by now very worried about the growing threat on their right flank and put together a force to defend there under General Mason McFarland, who has been Gort's chief of intelligence. I like this one-line quote about removing his intelligence chief from David Somerville's World War II Day by Day. Gort can be criticized for weakening this important department at such a vital stage. I love that sentence. I just thought I'd say that. Anyhow, on the 18th, at the end of the week, both Saint-Quentin and Cambrai fall to the panzers. But with the rapidity of the advance, the German flanks now lay dangerously exposed. Kleist knows this, as does Winston Churchill, who says that Tortoise has protruded his head dangerously far from the shell. In Paris, there is a bit of a breather, seeing that the Germans are not heading straight there. But still, French government employees are beginning to burn their secret files. Reynaud shakes up the high command and appoints a new cabinet, making himself also Minister of Defense. World War I hero Philippe Pétain is now Deputy Prime Minister. Maxime Weygand is recalled from the Middle East to take over Army command from Gamelin. He will assume command tomorrow evening. And this is where we stand as the week ends. The Dutch are defeated, the Belgians on the ropes, The Germans are speeding westward across northern France, shocking the Allies and indeed the entire world. This is also the week of Winston Churchill's blood, sweat, toil, and tears speech. And since it's one of the most famous speeches of the 20th century, there is a link to it below.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. I have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering.
There is literally nothing standing in the way of the German army cutting off the Belgian, French, and British forces to its north. Who are the heroes of this masterstroke? Well, I guess there is von Manstein, whose idea it was to attack through the Ardennes. Also Guderian for his daring, Rommel for his brilliance, and the villains or scapegoats on the losing side. It has to fall to Gamelin and Georges. But it seems to me that the real villain of the piece is Charles Hunsinger. Hunsinger, who was way behind with the buildup of his defenses. Hunsinger, who refused aerial assistance. Hunsinger, who lied about the bridges to excuse himself and also tried shifting blame to Korat. And Hunsinger, who pulled his men back from their Meuse defenses to their great consternation and frustration when they were doing their job of slowing the Germans just fine. And why all of this? Incompetence? Indifference? Something more sinister? Well, that is all just speculation, but I'll tell you this. We will see Charles Hunsinger again. If you'd like to see...
Right. So that is basically ends the Battle of France. And by basically the third week of June, the Germans control all of France. And they occupy the north for 4 years. They put a puppet government in the south during those 4 years. And it's going to take the American involvement along with the British and the French, who had basically gone over and evacuated from there. So some of you might have seen the movie Dunkirk. I think it came out in 2017, so it's been 4 years. But basically it talks about the evacuation of these soldiers. And if they had captured those soldiers, Britain would have fell to Hitler, and the Germans would have controlled Europe for no matter who knows how many years. But basically what happens, and let me show you on the map if I can. See if I can get to that. Okay, so if I share this with you, basically what happens after the Germans break through and they control, there is a small town up here on the coast called Dunkirk. And basically the Germans had forced them almost into the sea. And it takes a massive evacuation of more than 250,000 men to get them out, or this war might have been over before it really even started. And so if you have seen the movie, you know what it is. If you haven't seen the movie, this is the trailer, but it'll give you an idea about what the evacuation was like. And this basically saves enough time and enough men to be able to regroup and fight the next part of World War II, or Hitler would have controlled all of Europe.
We have to go to Dunkirk. Right on the stern line. We did. You know where we're going. It's a war, George. Copy Eastman, sir. Some people have a job to do. Wake up, bloody asshole!
So that was the evacuation. And really, if they had not gotten off of the coast or the continent, it would have been trouble, and it probably would have been the end of the war. So last thing, and then we'll take a little break here before we do the review game. Remember that after the Germans take over France, Hitler makes a secret trip into Paris, a city that he always wanted to visit, especially being an artist when he was earlier. And this is his visit into Paris.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond.
Compiègne, France, 22nd of June, 1940. Hitler met representatives of the French government and military to accept the nation's surrender. The Battle of France was over. All hostilities between Germany and France would end 3 days later on the 25th of June. Hitler insisted that the surrender ceremony be held in the same railway carriage where, in 1918, Germany had surrendered to the Allies, ending World War I. Afterwards, on Hitler's order, the Pullman car was displayed in a museum in Berlin, but it was destroyed late in the war in a British air raid. The reconstruction is now on display at Compiègne. Paris had fallen to the Germans on the 14th of June. Declared an open city, it was untouched by the fighting and was swiftly occupied, the German army parading down the Champs-Élysées past the Arc de Triomphe. Hitler, the frustrated artist and architect, wanted to visit Paris. The huge victory parade had been planned, but it was abandoned after advice from the German military, who feared it would be a prime target for British bombers. Instead, Hitler decided to stage a literal flying visit to Paris. Armed with a list of tourist destinations that he wanted to see, it would be his first time in the City of Light, and he came not only as a sightseer, but as the conqueror of Western Europe. Only the British Empire still fought on against him. At the time of the French capitulation, Hitler was at his fort headquarters in France, codenamed Wolfschlucht or Wolf's Gorge, where he had been directing the battle since the 6th of June 1940. 2 days after accepting the French surrender, Hitler made his trip to Paris. It was an almost furtive affair rather than a triumphal entry. Hitler's party flew in 2 special Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors to the Bourget airport in Paris, touching down at 5:30 in the morning. For the trip, Hitler had asked his personal architect, Albert Speer, to accompany him, along with the sculptor Arno Breker and architect Hermann Giesler. The rest of his entourage consisted of his usual aides and staff, including his pilot, Hans Bauer, secretary, Martin Bormann, adjutant, Schau, and General Wilhelm Keitel of the High Command. Hitler's party also included his personal protection officers from the Reichssicherheitsdienst, or RSD, and a small detachment of Führerbegleitkommando bodyguards, or FBK. Hitler being routinely guarded by several different SS and army agencies with sometimes overlapping responsibilities. The three civilians, Speer, Brecker, and Giesler, were kitted out in field grey officers' uniforms so as not to stand out in the party. Preparations in Paris for the Führer's visit were minimal. Streets were not cordoned off or guarded. Hitler's party in 5 large Mercedes field cars drove straight into the city through largely deserted streets. The cars were all open-topped, and Hitler sat in the front passenger seat of one of the cars, with Speer and Brecker on jump seats behind, and Giesler and some adjutants in the rear. First stop on the tour was Hitler's favorite, the Paris Opera House. He knew the building from studying its blueprints, but was awestruck by its beauty. Met on the steps by Colonel Hans Speidel of the occupation forces, who ironically in later years was a member of the anti-Hitler resistance amongst army circles. A French caretaker accompanied the group through the deserted building, unlocking doors. Hitler's evident knowledge of the building impressed his entourage. As Albert Speer wrote in his book in 1970, near the proscenium box, Hitler found the salon missing, remarked on it, and turned out to be right. The French attendant said that this room had been eliminated in the course of renovations many years ago. There, you see how well I know my way about, Hitler commented complacently. He seemed fascinated by the opera, went into ecstasies about its beauty, his eyes glittering with an excitement that struck me as uncanny. The attendant, of course, had immediately recognized the person he was guiding through the building. In a businesslike but distinctly aloof manner, he showed us through the rooms. When we were at last ready to leave the building, Hitler whispered something to his adjutant, who took a 50-mark note from his wallet and went over to the attendant, standing some distance away. Pleasantly but firmly, the man refused to take the money. Hitler tried a second time, sending Brecker over to him. The man persisted in his refusal. He had only been doing his duty, he told Brecker. After leaving the opera, Hitler's convoy drove to La Madeleine, where Hitler got out and viewed the church. The convoy now moved on to the Trocadero. Hitler got out to view the Eiffel Tower from a distance. He couldn't climb the tower because the French authorities had severed the lift cables shortly before the Germans had taken over Paris, and the Eiffel Tower remained out of commission until 1946. After many photos, the party drove on to pass the Arc de Triomphe with the tomb of the unknown warrior beneath the archway, and stopped again at the Invalides, home of Emperor Napoleon I's tomb. Hitler admired Napoleon, and there was much symbolism in his visit to this place. Hitler stood for a long time gazing down at Napoleon's burial place. Next up was the Pantheon, and Hitler was greatly impressed by its proportions. The last stop on the tour was Montmartre, and the giant white cathedral atop the hill, the Sacré-Cœur. People going to church recognized Hitler, but ignored him. By 9 a.m., Hitler's party was back at the airport preparing to depart. Hitler was ecstatic. He turned to Speer and said, "It was the dream of my life to be permitted to see Paris. I cannot say how happy I am to have had that dream fulfilled today."
So it's kind of crazy. 2 years ago, this month, I was we did a trip to London, Paris, and Rome. And this basically here, let me start here. This is standing in front of that opera house. In the reflection of the windows, you can see the gold. So basically, I'm standing in front of that opera house looking from left to right. This is almost straight ahead down those streets in the opera house. This is over to the far right. This is the dome inside of that thing. It's unbelievable. And then all of those things that you see that look gold are gold. So this is us in front of the opera house. There are a number of gold pieces. This is straight down looking across from that street. And then you can see there's the front of the building. All of that stuff is plated gold. So it's crazy to see that there. All right. So why don't you take 5 minutes? We'll come back at 11:07 and do the review game for this. So you can go get a drink, a snack, use the restroom, what have you, and then we'll be back here at 11:07 for the review game. Okay, so in the chat box is the game pin. It should be up on your screen as well. If you go to kahoot.it, you'll be able to sign in for the review game. Okay, so this will include some questions from the previous sections, just to make sure you're set. Right, which of the following was a reason Britain and France appeased Hitler at the Munich conference? Right? Prevent another world war. Prevent another world war. The game pin is still down there at the bottom. All right. What is the Sudetenland? Right? That's the part of Czechoslovakia that Hitler wanted back because it was taken away from Germany and has German-speaking nationals there. How did the term fascist originate? Right? That was Mussolini, remember? Mussolini starts the fascist party in Italy and then outlaws every other political party. Remember, Mussolini is brown shirt, or Mussolini's black shirts, excuse me. Hitler is brown shirts. Which British prime minister declared peace for our time when he gets off the plane after the Munich Agreement? I showed you that speech. Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain is the one that believed that appeasement would be about peace. What form of foreign policy did Neville Chamberlain engage in while trying to deal with Hitler? We just talked about it. That's appeasement, right? Appeasement, Churchill said, wouldn't work. And he was right. 6 months later, it didn't. Which of the following leaders led the British against the Nazi threat during World War II? You just saw him give a speech in that Battle of France video. Winston Churchill, right? Winston Churchill is the prime minister that leads Britain during World War II. He replaces Chamberlain. Which of the following world leaders was premier of Russia at the time of World War II? He and Hitler signed an agreement to divide up Eastern Europe. Joseph Stalin, right? Joseph Stalin. Which of the following was the leader of both the Nazi Party and Germany as a whole? That's Hitler. Hitler is leader of Germany almost the entire decade of the 1930s until his death in the 40s. All right, Britain and France's use of appeasement with Hitler accomplished which of the following? Right? It led to Hitler's invasion of all of Czechoslovakia. So remember, he said he would stop at the Sudetenland, and as soon as he has basically Britain and France agree to the Munich Agreement, he realizes they're not going to stop him from taking the rest of Czechoslovakia, and that's what he does. All right, the main reason the United States failed to halt fascist aggression was due to their policy of what? After World War I in the 1920s and the 1930s, what does the US government believe in? Isolationism, right? America First Committee, remember that? They do not want to get involved in another European war. All right, the German military strategy of Blitzkrieg can best described as what? Right, utilizing fast-moving planes followed by massive infantry and also those Panzer tanks. Which of the following countries was invaded prior to the start of World War II? All of those were invaded. Austria by Germany, Czechoslovakia by Germany, Albania by Italy. Italy also invades Northern Africa as well. Which of the following led to the failure on the part of the Democrats to halt the fascist aggression? Or excuse me, the democracies, not Democrats. All of those, right? Isolationism by the United States, appeasement by Britain and France, economic problems across the globe in the 1930s due to results of the World War in the 1910s, and then, obviously the United States Great Depression during that time. Which of the following gave Hitler the confidence to surprise attack on Poland? Okay, his non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, realizing he would not have to fight both the French and the British along with the Russians. Remember, the Russians sided with the Allies in World War I until they got out of the World War because of the Russian civil war, basically, between the Bolsheviks and the non-Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution of 1917. And then they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. So as soon as he realized they weren't going to be joining the French and the British, it gave him the confidence to go ahead and take over what he wanted. Which of the following countries used isolationism following World War I leading into World War II? Right? It's the United States, America First Committee. They don't want to get involved in another world war. How did isolationism affect the United States military leaders' relationship with Europe? Right? They basically assumed that the United States would fail to respond. So Hitler and Mussolini both didn't think the United States would get involved at all. Which of the following totalitarian dictators is the leader of Italy? He and his followers wear black shirts. Mussolini, right? Mussolini. All right, one similarity between Germany, Italy, and Japan's drive for empire expansion can be explained how? Totalitarian goals of economic expansion. That's why they want land to be able to get to natural resources and then have markets for goods and services after they utilize those resources. Japan began its conquest by invading Manchuria. What did it claim? Why did they claim they could take Manchuria? Right? Both claim to be protecting their citizens and property. All right, the Stalin-Hitler Pact of 1939 was aggressive because right? It defines spheres of influence similar to the way that 8 countries did to China in the late 1800s when we talked about spheres of influence there. It basically just carved parts of other countries up and claimed it for a conquering country. All right, which of the following was a principle of the America First Committee? Right? All of those are true. So those of you that put yellow, you're right, but The America First Committee said that, look, America needed a very strong defense to fight off anybody that would try to invade them, that federal monies and dollars aid to other countries weakened America, could be better spent in our country. And then finally, American democracy would be preserved by staying out of World War II, not getting into it. So all of those are true. Joseph Stalin forced collectivization on the Soviet Union. What is collectivization? Right? It's grouping of farms into large units controlled by the government, basically taking away from private individuals and having the government control the farms. Which of the following pacts ensured Soviet neutrality towards Nazi Germany? Right? The Stalin-Hitler Pact of 39, where they divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, and Germany and the Soviet Union agree not to attack each other. Right? Which of the following battles was a loss for the US, but also the reason it entered World War II? Pearl Harbor, right? December 7th, 1941. Which of the following invasions occurred prior to Germany's invasion of Poland? Right? Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. Remember I talked about how they went into Africa? All right, how many weeks did it take for Germany to defeat Poland? Remember we said 5 weeks. 5 weeks to take over Poland. How many weeks did it take for Germany to defeat France in the Battle of France? Six. 5 weeks to do Poland to the east, 6 weeks to do France, controlled by Germany, to the west. What country did Germany go through to attack France? Perfect. Belgium. Belgium was the main point of attack. Part of Netherlands was taken over, Luxembourg as well, too. All right, what was the fortification that the French built in hopes of stopping the German attack? These were the bunkers along the border. What was that called? Maginot Line, right? The Maginot Line. The French and British were forced to evacuate France from the French city port of what? Dunkirk. I just showed you that trailer from the movie 4 years ago. Over 250,000 soldiers evacuated out of that port, or the war would have been over before it started. The puppet government set up by Germany was located in what part of France? North, east, south, or west? set up in the south. The Germans controlled the north with troops. They set up a puppet government under Vichy in the south. The Germans controlled this part of France by July of 40. I just told you. Better get it right. North. North. They controlled all of France, but they occupied the north with troops. Country number 1. Germany. Very good. Country 2. Austria. Country 3. Country 3 is Czechoslovakia. Only one left. Country 4 is Poland, right? Country 4 is Poland. So on the map exercise, it has the rest of those map identifications, right? So the second set on that map, as we have said, is the countries of Norway, Sweden, Finland. Denmark is the first one listed there. And then the last set is France, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg right there. The only thing that you have to do between now and next Monday is the review game if you want to practice. And then your unit test is available for you 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. The end of the grading period is the 23rd. Any assignments from this quarter can still be made up for full credit. So you should have finished the map from yesterday and those review questions from yesterday. This here in module 13, test number 14, over the Battle of France, is what you have to finish, and it'll show up in areas as a grade starting on Monday the 19th. All right, any questions or concerns, you can hang around, but we're at the end. So have a great weekend, be safe, and we'll see you on Monday.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Take care.